Namaste and welcome to the Goa Chronicles show. 5.1 million people around the world are dead due to the COVID pandemic. The truth behind the science around the origin of the SARS-CoV-2 lies with Ralph Baric of the University of North Carolina, Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, and Professor Zhijing Li of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. According to an email obtained by the US Right to Know organization and in our possession, on January 13th, 2020, in an email to Peter Daszak at 6:50 p.m., Ralph Baric states, "Hi Peter, I have to participate in an NIH call tomorrow at 10. I believe it's a strategic meeting designed to help craft an NIH response plan to the WU-CoV. Hope things are going well." Then Ralph Baric says in that same email, which is the entire discussion of today and a moot point that we need to look at. He tells Peter Daszak in that email, "Looks like we have found our highly variable SARS-like CoV." Let me repeat it. "Looks like we have found our highly variable SARS-like CoV." In reply to Ralph Baric's email, Peter Daszak at 7:55 p.m. states, "It sounds like we are on the same call, and my thoughts exactly regarding the highly variable SARS-like CoV. I've told journalists about it, but it's a complicated story for them to get across." On January 13, 2020, why is this important? It is important because before China or the World Health Organization made any official statement on the nature of the coronavirus, both Ralph Baric and Peter Daszak in their emails appear to be confident that the coronavirus in China is a highly variable SARS-like CoV. Most importantly, Ralph Baric refers to the coronavirus as our highly variable SARS-like CoV, displaying a familiarity with the virus or the nature of the virus. In 2013, Ralph Baric, the American virologist, approached Zhijing Li at a meeting. Baric was a top expert in viruses with hundreds of papers to his credit, and she, along with her team at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, had been discovering them by the fistful in bat caves. In one sample of bat guano, she had detected the genome of a new virus called SHC014. That was one of the two closest relatives to the original SARS virus. But her team had not been able to culture it in the lab. Baric had developed a way around that problem, a technique termed as reverse genetics in coronaviruses. Not only did it allow him to bring an actual virus to life from its genetic code, but he could mix and match parts of multiple viruses. He wanted to take the spike gene from SHC014 and move it into a genetic copy of the SARS virus he had already had in his lab. The spike molecule is what lets coronavirus open a cell and gets inside it. The resulting chimera would demonstrate whether the spike of HSC014 would attach to human cells. Barrick asked Xi Jinping if he could have a genetic data for SHC014. She was gracious enough to send us those sequences almost immediately, is what Barrick told the media some years ago. His team introduced the virus, modified with the code into mice and into a petri dish of human airway cells. Sure enough, the chimera exhibited robust replication in human cells. Evidence that nature was full of coronavirus ready to leap directly to people. It's no surprise that a group of Chinese scientists lobbied through the US professor Ralph Baric to rename SARS-CoV-2, given by the Coronavirus Study Group CSG of the International Committee of Virus Taxonomy. Let me tell you how China attempted to keep China and Wuhan name out of the coronavirus pandemic, and why it is important that to understand how Ralph Baric, Peter Daszak, and Xi Jinping worked with different scientists from China and the US. In the correspondence, the Chinese scientists feared that the virus would become known as Wuhan coronavirus or Wuhan pneumonia. In an email dated 13 February 2020, Professor Xi Jinping wrote to Ralph Baric. The subject of the email was virus name. The email had an attached document titled A Unique and Unified Name for the Novel Coronavirus from Wuhan. The email stated, Dear Ralph, we heard that the 2019 nCoV was renamed as SARS-CoV-2. We had a fierce discussion among Chinese virologists. We have some comments on the name. I am wondering if the CoV study group would consider a revision. I attached the comments from me and my Chinese colleagues. The document from Professor Xi Jinping to Professor Ralph Baric states, a unique and unified name is needed for the novel coronavirus identified from Wuhan. An outbreak of unusual pneumonia of unknown cause in Wuhan, China was first reported in December 2019. By Jan 5th, 2020, Chinese scientists had quickly identified the causative agent, a new type of coronavirus belonging to the beta coronavirus genus of the Coronaviridae family that also includes severe acute respiratory syndrome and the Middle East respiratory syndrome, that's MERS-CoV. On 12 January 2020, the World Health Organization temporarily named the virus 2019 novel coronavirus. On 30th January, WHO recommended naming the disease as 2000 nCoV acute respiratory disease. On February 8, 2020, the China National Health Commission announced naming the disease as novel coronavirus pneumonia. On 11 February 2020, WHO renamed the disease coronavirus disease 2019. On 7 February, the Coronavirus Study Group posted a manuscript and suggested designating the novel coronavirus as severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, that's SARS-CoV-2, based on the phylogenetic analysis of related coronaviruses. Xi Jinping further in a document to Ralph Baric expresses, by 11 February 2020, the new coronavirus had caused more than 40,000 confirmed infections and more than 1,000 deaths, mostly in mainland China, in spite of the efforts by the Chinese government and its people to contain the spread of the virus in the past week. It goes without saying the effects of the epidemic on all aspects of Chinese life are devastating and possibly irreversible. Consequently, and this is important, consequently, appropriately naming the virus and disease becomes a matter of importance to the Chinese people in general and virologists in specific. And the issue has been fervently discussed and debated among scientists, with the outcomes so far as noted above. We fully agree that the new virus and SARS-CoV belong to the same virus species by classification. However, the consensus opinion of Chinese virologists are that none of the currently proposed name reflects the uniqueness and the characteristics of the novel virus, and that more consideration is needed for naming the virus. Based on the following reasons, we propose to give a unique and unified name to the new virus. Professor Zhixing Li, also known as the Batwoman, continues to impress on Ralph Baric on behalf of the Chinese scientists. All proposed names are either too generic, is what she says, or too familiar, to previously known viruses, or contain an Arabic number. This makes it hard to remember or recognize, leading to a tendency among the general population and scientists alike to use shorthand terms such as Wuhan coronavirus or Wuhan pneumonia. This has in fact been the cause since it was named 2019 nCoV. The practice would, however, stigmatize and insult the people in Wuhan who are still suffering from the outbreak. The document sent by Professor Zhixing Li to Ralph Baric further states, the new virus is still evolving. It is too early to predict the outcome of the outbreak. However, it is already clear that the infection of the new virus has diverse symptoms, from asymptomatic infection to severe pneumonia and even death. It has a less case fatality rate and high transmissibility than SARS-CoV, indicating a clear difference from SARS-CoV. Again, therefore, it is appropriate not to designate the new virus as SARS-CoV-2 before we know more properties of the virus. Why did we bring this all out? To show you a relationship between three main players in the truth behind the COVID pandemic, the truth behind the coronavirus. Ralph Baric, Peter Daszak, Professor Zhixing Li. What did Ralph Baric mean by saying we have found our highly variable coronavirus? I have my esteemed panelists. I'm very glad they've taken time out to be with me and with our viewers. First is Dr. Lawrence Selling, foreign affairs expert, retired colonel of the US Army. Then we have the Padma Shri Dr. Sanjeev Bagai, chairman and MD of Nephron. Major General retired Shashi Asthana, global strategic expert. Padma Shri Professor Dr. Mohsen Wali, cardiologist and physician. And Professor Swaran Singh, foreign policy expert and China expert. Dr. Lawrence Selling, thank you for taking time out. I'm going to come to you with the first question, sir. You've been investigating the origin of the COVID crisis. You have been, there have been some documents that you've been putting out, tweets that you are putting out that were actually very useful for people to investigate the origins of the COVID crisis. So what do you have to say about Ralph Baric, Peter Daszak, Professor Zhixing Li, and the entire COVID crisis, sir?
Well, first of all, I believe COVID-19 came from a laboratory in China. The people who have said that it comes from nature have provided no evidence to support that theory. Now, you only need to look at the structure of COVID-19 to know that it came from a laboratory. There's a particular structure called the furin cleavage site, which exists in COVID-19, but does not exist in hundreds of bat coronaviruses from which COVID-19 could have evolved. Now, we've known for up to 20 years that furin cleavage sites increase the transmissibility and the lethality of coronaviruses. And in 2013, scientists from the People's Liberation Army demonstrated that they could artificially insert furin cleavage sites. Now, finally, and this is kind of a smoking gun, is that the people you mentioned, Peter Daszak, Ralph Barrick, Xi Jinping from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and Linfa Wang of the University in Singapore submitted a research application to the U.S. Department of Defense Advanced Research Projects, where they specifically asked to insert furin cleavage sites into bat coronaviruses. Now, this is in 2018. So I think it's quite clear that the furin cleavage site is a smoking gun, among other anomalies within COVID-19. And this was planned well before the outbreak. So since the United States banned gain-of-function research, these experiments of gain-of-function and artificially inserting a furin cleavage site was done in China.
So essentially, sir, what it really means, Dr. Selin, is that then you have US scientists and Chinese scientists working to create what could be a potential bioweapon to unleash on the world. Does that not mean that? They're working with dangerous viruses. You have a gain of function research which has been stopped in the US. It gets shifted to China and they continue with the same acts. Isn't that not clearly a bioweapon in the making? Or were they working on that?
Well, among looking at the origin of COVID-19, one of the things that I investigated was the structure of China's biowarfare program and the infiltration of Chinese and in particular People's Liberation Army scientists into U.S. laboratories. Now, these are not separate issues. They are actually should be considered working together for the benefit of China's biowarfare program. So it's quite clear to me that COVID-19 was made in a laboratory in China and as part of a massive Chinese biowarfare program.
So the most important question people are trying to debate is obviously the fact that whether it's originated from nature or the lab. But let's for a moment take the hypothesis that it's come out from the lab. Could it have been deliberately unleashed, or do you think it could have been an accident because they were dealing with such powerful viruses and they did not have the safety standards that were required at the Wuhan lab?
Well, there's evidence to support both an accidental release and a deliberate release. I have a source inside China who was in Wuhan at the beginning of the outbreak. So he was on the ground and he had contact with people with the People's Liberation Army. And according to this source, he said that the COVID-19 sample virus was already available in 2019 and the People's Liberation Army sent a sample to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to do two things. First of all, to test the transmissibility of this COVID-19 sample in non-human primates, that is monkeys. The other project that he claims was going on at the same time, that the People's Liberation Army was going to test this COVID-19 sample in the community. And what had happened was, again, according to this source, is that they underestimated the transmissibility and the sample of the virus that was distributed in the community got out of hand.
Essentially, what you're saying, Dr. Lawrence, is that the PLA, that's the army, the Chinese army, handed over the sample to the Wuhan Institute of Virology to experiment on primates and even a community. That's what your source is actually trying to tell us. Is that correct?
That's exactly what the source told me.
So essentially what we then have, and which is why China has been very cagey about the investigation, and the World Health Organization has really not gone beyond investigating the real origin of the COVID pandemic, it certainly leads us to believe that the probability of it being a bioweapon is much more than it just being a normal experiment that has gone wrong. Is that true?
That I believe is true. I believe the COVID-19 virus was part of a much broader Chinese biowarfare program. And I think there's been too much emphasis on the Wuhan Institute of Virology alone, because there were many laboratories and research centers in China that were involved in the development of COVID-19. In particular, the third military medical university. It had isolated what we think may be the backbone bat coronavirus that was used to build COVID-19, and certainly other research institutes in China, in particular the Military Veterinary Research Institute.
So I'm going to take the question to Padma Shri Dr. Sanjeev Bagai. Dr. Bagai, you've heard Dr. Lawrence Sellen, who has been investigating the origin of the COVID crisis. He believes, through his investigation, that it is definitely a bioweapon. The evidences that he has gathered leads us to believe that it's a bioweapon. What are your views on it, sir, as a leading practitioner in India, in the medical field?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Good evening, all. I think there are 7 quick points which I need to make. And I'll quickly enumerate each one amongst them. I think for decades now, it is overwhelmingly evident that China are serial offenders. There is no question about it. They are overt outliers. It's an opaque and closed society, and I dare say what we don't know, we will never know, because the truth will never come out. The origin of the virus, there have been multiple hypotheses and suggestions and theories, be it the wet markets in Wuhan or outside Wuhan, whether it be a lab leak or a biogenic warfare, whether it came from animals not in the live market, where was it environmental. There is a beautiful study which has been published just yesterday in Science.org by Laureen Garrett from New York, in which the first reported case, what we call as case number 1, index case, was isolated and diagnosed between 8th December and 16th December. This person was a 41-year-old accountant and was admitted with scientific case records of the hospitalization on 22nd December with exactly COVID-like symptoms. Now, the question is, if it was in early part of December, and then the pandemic was then declared in Jan-Feb by WHO, we've lost a lot of precious time of close to 2 months. That is sufficient. Even a week is sufficient in a pandemic with cross-border international travel. During this period, I think China closed the lid of information. They may have, or they must have, and they surely would have wiped out each and every evidence, be it of labs or be it of the wet markets, be it of the data or the records or any IT information which perhaps would have been a vital link, including the lab research. Now, the third important point which I want to make is what my previous panelist very beautifully has explained, what we call as gain of function. For a simple viewer, let me just explain this. COVID has multiple spikes. They have 26 spikes per viron. Each spike, what we call as the S protein, has 2 parts, S1 and S2. S1 and S2 is joined very close together at a furin cleavage site. It's a part of a protein linkage between S1 part and S2 part, and they both have to get disendembled, means dissociate from each other, where S1 then, through the energy which is picked up by the dissociation between S1 and S2, is propelled like a rocket towards the host cell. So S1 attaches on to your ACE receptors. Why does this happen when we call as gain of function, which allows S1 to dismember from S2 and gain rapid entry, is when you change the amino acid sequence at the furin cleavage site. The amino acids which have been changed, and this has published literature in multiple international journals, not only of medicine, but even of chemistry, is serine is replaced by alanine and allene. What this does is it changes the surface charge density. That means your positive and negatives attract, it pushes the virus and protein deep into the cell much quicker. Therefore, the infectivity, therefore, the transmissibility, therefore, the seriousness. Without doubt, it is one of the most infectious and transmissible, both together, viruses which we have seen in the recent history. Point number 4 is when we knew that this is happening, that means China knew this is happening in early part or mid part of December, they allowed international travel to occur, not only in Southeast Asia, but a lot of labor workers which were going into northern part of Italy, and it spread. And it spread in European Union and then subsequently worldwide. What is important is, till date, it's been now close to 1.5, 2 years, we don't have a formal, thorough, independent, and unbiased investigation into this. I think China owes this to the world. If they are not worthy of living in this world, then they need not. That choice is theirs. But they have destroyed the world medically, socially, economically, and psychologically. I think they owe it to the world to be a part of the world members. You can't have them a part of the investigation body. This will be conflict of interest. It has to be unbiased investigation. And last, most importantly, is where is the issue becomes even more disappointing with regards to China is substandard vaccines with no publication in any international literature worth its salt of any reputable data of their vaccines, which have been proven to begin with 50% vaccine efficacy. It has slipped below 30. Most countries in Southeast Asia and Africa have returned the vaccines or have now opted for other vaccines because the vaccine effectiveness on the ground has been through the sink. The issue is, why did WHO allow such substandard vaccines to come into the market? There is definitely a conflict of interest between the head of WHO and China. Last important point is, even if you investigate this now, you will only get piecemeal diagnosis. I think you're not going to be able to get it because the gap between the origin and now trying to collect evidence is far too wide. In a summary, I think China is responsible. It has spread. The virus has been manipulated. That means it has been enhanced in terms of infectivity. There is literature on this, there is data on this, there is publication on this. The question is, we have to put a price on China. Over to
you. Dr. Mohsen Wali.
Yes, thank you.
So, what are your views on China, the World Health Organization, and what both Dr. Bagai and Dr. Lawrence Ellen had to say? Do you see it as a bioweapon?
Yeah, I would not. I had done so many talks on your channels also.
Yes.
That future of warfare and use of bioweapon, this virus being developed for that purpose. That apart, I would make very innocent statement and very proven statement, which is still online, and I am surprised it's still online, with reference to Scientific American, with reference to Xi Jinping, the Bat woman, 7 p.m. on December 30th, when Ms. Xi Jinping on 2019, December 30th, 7 p.m. attending an academic meeting, her cell phone rings. And it was on the other side, her boss telling that we need you in the Wuhan lab. There are some samples of the patient suffering from a very new illness, very peculiar form of pneumonia, and is very dangerous, and you are required, drop whatever you are doing and deal with it now. So this was what? And after that, nobody knows better than Madam Xi Jinping what she had uncovered as per her statement. What she said, could it have leaked from my lab? Of course, later it was denied. But this was her first reaction, could it have leaked from my lab? And she was the one who was hunting around, and she was aware of the various viruses, the virulence of the viruses, and the purpose for which this virus was being researched, I would say researched with a carefully chosen words, was not known that when it would be made to come out by the method which they know best, will it further mutate to a dangerous form? This was not known to any one of them. And the second point which I'm going to make is that for some reason, despite all odds, and we pointed out many mistakes of WHO. I, being a doctor, I am telling this frankly, many mistakes which WHO has done. In the very early days, it was spreading from human to human. They were talking of Hage Chinese in Italy. Then WHO till late prevented us for advising using masks, which was the past experience of the previous SARS viruses to be used for prevention and effective prevention of this virus. Then, of course, ivermectin and other issues. Extension of our honorable chief of WHO second term. This is again pointer towards some friendly ties. What I am summarizing is, it is now, as Dr. Bagai has said, would be very difficult to pinpoint the origin. And the case which was reported in yesterday, I was also aware in this our discussion is probably an offshoot of that revelation. Xi Jinping herself has said in the same write-up of Scientific American that there will be more viruses of such type coming, number one. Number two, what we know is just a tip of an iceberg. And number three, probably the researchers at that point were not aware that it will, I suffered from that Delta variant. I know how severe it was. I carried my report of antibody positive titer in my blood, yet I suffered from almost, I would have died. And this was so dangerous. And this was in November last year when Delta variant was not known. And as you see the date, December 30th, many cases by that time, before this was identified, were reported and the samples were collected. So a large number of patients have already suffered. International travels was not banned. Hage Chinese campaign was going on. One of the aspects at that time, I was giving talks with Dr. Bagai also sometimes. There was reason was that China was having lots of goods to be dispatched for New Year. It must have been earlier than December 30th that it was probably commercial angle that it did not come out. It was not let the people to be known, and people were not aware of this devastating virus. They were purposely, what the word you use is, it was underplayed, and deliberate hiding, I would say. I'm not pinpointing to any country. It could be any country, but if we do deliberate hiding, then we are probably playing with the lives of humanity. We are playing with the humanity, and this was already done. We lost so many people. And I personally, having suffered from coronavirus to an extent of severe lung damage, I can say that how difficult it is to survive from this.
You know, one of the most interesting things that we were doing as the Goa Chronicle in our investigation is that we found that the first 4 cases that were reported, the first 4 official cases that were reported, actually were reported at the China's military hospital. Right? Now let's understand this. You have a claim that it could have been the wet market, which is a civilian establishment. And you have the first 4 cases that are taken into the military hospital. Doesn't that leave a question mark that the probability of the first 4 cases could have been within the vicinity of a military establishment, which is what the Wuhan Institute of Virology is? And the labs that are there are all connected to the Ministry of Defense. Let's get in the views of Major General Shashi Asthana, retired global strategic expert, on what is his views on China, the probability of the COVID being a bioweapon.
Thank you for having me on your show. Having heard all the specialists, few things I must give the strategic context to this whole discussion. What is most important is that now that the genie is out of the bottle, kind courtesy is back, woman, the intent has to be clear. China wants to become superpower by using non-contact warfare or non-kinetic warfare in addition to whatever they are doing in the kinetic field. and biological weapon is one of the same, one of the instrument of doing so. Now, when I say, in fact, Lawrence brought out very clearly the connect between the PLA, I would also bring out another connect, that is PLA cyber army was targeting all the virological labs in the world, especially in the United States. And therefore, they had fair amount of data. 2015, certainly they were into the biological warfare game. This is certainly a biological weapon. And why I say so, there are some evidences which have been discussed so far. I want to bring out certain circumstantial evidences. Now, circumstantial evidences, if you see, firstly, it's a violation of the convention. There is a biological weapon convention. Initially, we had the Geneva Convention. The convention says it prohibits the development, production, acquisition, transfer, stockpiling, use of biological and toxic weapon. And what is a weapon? Which causes organisms or toxins to harm or kill human, animals or plants. Now, this virus research in the manner which has been described by the specialist qualifies all this. So therefore, there is a major violation. When we talk of circumstantial evidence, there is no doubt in the world that Wuhan was the first place to be locked down. There is also no doubt, this angle has been brought out, that initial patients were in the military hospital. There is also no doubt that the domestic flights were stopped the moment it was detected, but international flights were allowed to continue, so that in addition to the commercial angle which was brought out, this virus spreads the entire world. The third important thing is that the emails have brought out whatever conversation took place. There is no doubt that the lethality of the kind of virus which has stuck were the biggest, shall we say, competitors of China. USA is suffering, Europe is suffering most, and so was India. Now these three, if he has a global ambition, then Europe and US have to be targeted, and if he wants China-centric Asia, then India has to be targeted, and all this happened. If you see some of the countries like Pakistan or North Korea, etc., they were not that badly affected. So this leaves a question mark. There are a lot of question marks because they have erased all the evidences, and therefore linkages cannot be found out, but certainly these are points to ponder. The next point is that if you see the Chinese with largest population in the world, how is it that the second wave did not come there? How is it that they had so many vaccines? Is it that they gave some antidote to their people? Is it that so many died and they did not, the news never came out? But the fact is that yes, they were better prepared and they misused the lethality of this virus for profiteering to establish a health Silk Road. And initially, for whatever worth their vaccine is, they were looking at a big market in terms of the equipment which is required for the treatment of this virus, which they had in plenty when the virus broke out.
Correct.
And also the shall we say the vaccines which they were trying to bring out, they thought that perhaps they will be the biggest vaccine market. Now, whether it was a deliberate leak or accidental leak, the question is that even if it was an accidental leak, hypothetically, the way it was hidden, the way the strategic benefits were sought out of this pandemic was basically to ensure that the aims which they were trying to achieve of becoming the global power by 2049 or 2035, I think they thought that with this biological weapon, they have struck gold much earlier than what they thought. And therefore, it is now time, because everybody else will have an economic collapse. And this is the time perhaps we can come up. And in the recent talk with President Joe Biden, you would have seen President Xi Jinping was trying to tell his domestic audience that yes, you have done a right thing of giving me the third term, and you have done a right thing that I have been able to destroy the rest of the world to make China the undisputed master of this world. This is what he was trying to say, although that's a separate issue that he's...
So let me take the question, sir, to Professor Swaran Singh, a foreign policy expert and also a China expert. Professor Singh, China, COVID, bioweapon, China's lack of working with the rest of the world to help them get more information, China not working with the World Health Organization to provide the kind of information that's required to understand the origin of the COVID. What are your views, sir?
Thank you. I think the first thing I wish to share with you and your audience is that every next day I feel more confused than I was yesterday. And I heard Dr. Mohsin Wali mentioning how WHO has not been able to come out with any conclusive assessment of even the origins. I see the same thing among experts. In fact, it's a bit of an unenviable situation now that I'm not a medicine person, that for every report that says that this was a leak from lab, you can see 2 reports coming out which talk about this being a zoonotic spillover instead. We are discussing one report. The other report from University of Arizona today is by Dr. Michael Worobe, which says it's a spillover from the market. So issue here is that there is complete chaos even among the scientific community to come to a conclusion, because there are all kinds of, allow me to say conspiracy theories, as if, because there is no substantive conclusion in which one direction you could see the world moving in terms of what has happened on the ground. Second issue which I want to underline is, I understand there is more or less consensus now that it originated in China, possibly in Wuhan. But the fact that we repeatedly keep talking about the Bat woman, Shi Chengli, a very celebrated biologist in China, but remember, she's also highly awarded, recognized in Western nations, France, including United States. So she's been well recognized in Western world. She has been working closely.
Mr. Singh, you have you have experiments going on in the same lab that Professor Xi Jinping, the highly decorated scientist, has been working on. These experiments, by her own admissions, are considered to be highly dangerous, in terms if you read her papers. So in all probability, let's assume for a moment we are not saying it's a bioweapon. We are saying they are working on the gain of function research is there.
Let us say it is a bioweapon. Why not?
Okay, let's say it's a bioweapon.
Let us say it is a bioweapon.
So could it have not been that during her experiments, no matter how decorated she is, that there could have been a probability of an accident happening because the standards at the lab were not very good. In fact, one of the cables in 2018, Xi Jinping tells the NIH and the EcoHealth Alliance, because they had a tie-up, that the safety standards of the lab was not very good. So could that not have been a probability? And should not have that been China's responsibility to at least allow for investigations?
Let me answer that. Nations work on still more dangerous and deadly projects than this project that we are mentioning, where the leak, let us say conspiracy theory is true, it was a lab leak. And that is the first point. Nations do work on many of these projects which could potentially boomerang. You could talk about nuclear weapons. Countries still go on working on nuclear weapons, for example. And second is that in this lab only, there was enormous collaboration happening. And you yourself mentioned maybe the dirty job is passed on to China to constantly work on things which are not allowed in the United States. And this is not the only example. And China is called sweatshop, the factory of the world, simply because some people in United States don't think it worthwhile to do that production, which is cheaper and easier, and rules are different when it comes to China. So hand in glove situation is something which is also very apparent here. And the third point, I think, yes, to some extent we can, question Chinese involvement in it. But also remember, we are entering a world now where if you look back last 20 years, increasingly diseases have become transnational, whether it is HIV AIDS or Zika or H1N1 or one after another, SARS and now coronavirus. The frequency of any disease in a particular locality spreading very quickly around the world is a known phenomenon. And that is what you just mentioned yourself. Shih Cheng-li also says that this could constantly go on mutating, and there could be future other diseases. So I think there are multiple studies that are coming out with multiple conclusions, whether it was an innocent research of scientists to move and walk ahead of nature unfolding its own threats in future and preparing human civilization to deal with that, or it is a zoonotic spillover, or it is a laboratory lab. Point is, after 2 years, even the scientific community is constantly struggling to come to any conclusion.
No, Mr. Singh, they wouldn't, because they would have a problem because they're not getting access to the Wuhan lab or the surroundings to understand it. Now,
that's a very
let's take your
question.
example.
Let me answer that question to you. Access to laboratories in China, maybe Chinese became reluctant after this boomeranged around the world. But Americans and every other foreigners, they had access and collaboration with these people all these years. You can't say they were innocent, they knew nothing about what was happening on the ground.
I've never said that.
And
I'm saying US is equally to be blamed.
So
I'm saying NIH funded it.
Everybody is in hand and glove is what I'm saying. The Chinese possibly were given the job to do the dirty work.
All right. Let's go back to Dr. Lawrence Selling, sir. We've got 5 more minutes left in this debate, this discussion rather. What are your final comments, sir? How do we deal with this chaos, this confusion over the truth of the COVID crisis?
Well, I think we need to get to a consensus that it was made in the laboratory. And I think the dilemma is now, as the person who just spoke, is that there are many people who do not want to blame China for the laboratory origin of COVID-19, because they would have to do something about it. There are many financiers in the world who are deeply invested in China. There are politicians who have relationships with China and don't want to upset them. There's people in the scientific community that could be considered complicit. So I think one of the reasons that we're seeing no progress in terms of determining the origin of COVID-19 is there are many people who either lose money or might be blamed for helping China do this. So I think we need to keep going and keep pressing the issue in terms of this was originated in China. It's part of a Chinese biowarfare program, and we can't stop saying it out loud.
Dr. Bagai, how would you deal with China on this, sir?
I wish I was a decision maker in that. My decision would be very straightforward. But I guess absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I think you have to look at it in a very holistic manner very quickly. Not allowing the investigation itself to happen is being a partner in crime till date. Not sharing the information, partner in crime. Allowing it to leak when you know your first case was between 8th and 16th December, that's a global crime. Very quickly to summarize, if you see what happened after World War II, it took a lot of moral collective responsibility of a lot of allied forces to bring down certain evil regimes. I think that same will happen. It will not happen through a military war, but it is going to happen through various other things which can hurt China much more. It's a law of nature. What goes up so rapidly comes down even more rapidly.
Sure.
I think they have called their Waterloo. It's only a question of time how they will get nailed. They cannot run away from the fact that they have destroyed many aspects of the world willfully and knowingly, and they have concealed, fudged, manipulated data. That's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. If you have leaked something, let's say, for example, unknowingly or knowingly, at least own up to it so that you can clean up the mess and not hurt human lives. This is global genocide, what they have precipitated.
Sure, sir. Dr. Mohsen Wali, your final comments. How do we deal with China?
I would be very frank that evidence has been destroyed. Nobody is going to have a Nobel Prize for unearthing that evidence. They have manipulated. They had in power the chief of WHO who was misguiding the medical fraternity also. I'm very much disturbed with that aspect. As a doctor, I can say if the mask would have come much earlier, then the things would have been different. Then the vaccine also, our co-vaccine also probably suffered the same way, because maybe that country which we are talking about was not very keen that co-vaccine should be marketed globally, which we are already planning. And the most important thing is, if one has made the mistake, one has to have courage to stand up and say sorry to the world that it has happened from us, from our side, from our lab. It is our virus. Don't try to change the name of the virus on the pretext that people will come to know, like Wuhan virus and things like that, China virus. Globally, stand with courage and say sorry. People who have lost lives, you cannot give them back life, but at least acknowledge the mistake and compensate the way you choose the best, and compensate the way the world tries to choose the best. So this is my
Major Astana, what's your final comment on China and how do we deal with it?
Chinese ambition can force them to use the weapons of mass destruction in many other ways. It could be another virus, it could be nuclear armament which they are trying to increase, it could be cyber, it could be chemical, it could be economic coercion, it could be anything. So therefore, China has to be made to pay. And to make to pay, there is a need for the entire world to come together, create an alternate economic supply chain, an alternate global factory, an alternate technological supply chain, and create all the facilities which China is trying to work out. I think an isolation of China is important to start with, and I think a stronger actions would perhaps follow later.
Dr. Singh, Professor Singh, sorry, what are your final comments?
Thank you.
Professor Singh.
No, that's fine. Thank you so much. I think I want to underline, I think you mentioned briefly that the strongest mechanism in dealing with this possibility of weapons being manufactured by any country is a very well-established convention called Biological Weapons Convention. Now I want your viewers to find out which is the country behind blocking creation of a strong monitoring mechanisms under that Biological Weapons Convention. And you will find your answers, where is the culprit? Also find an answer, where are these weapons manufactured that are spreading around the world, killing everybody every day around the world? How come terrorists continue to have no dearth of weapons? Countries have no dearth of weapons. 70% of weapons production happens in one particular country that makes lots of money in selling those weapons, which are killing us every day around the world. So, you can pick and choose your sort of villains of peace if you wish to, but I think the lesson lies in somehow finding a way in reaching out scientifically to find out how this disease occurred and what can be learned from there and how we can avoid repeating it in the future.
Okay, we've run short of time. I'd like to thank all my panelists.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank all my panelists for this lovely discussion. My personal opinion is that the COVID pandemic is just the start to what the world has seen as a bio-warfare. I think the bio-warfare is only going to get worse, and the world will have to brace itself for such pandemics in the days to come, in the years to come. Thank you everyone, and see you next Saturday at 6 p.m. on the Goa Chronicle show. Bharat Mata Ki Jai.